In this lesson, we're going to be talking about recursive functions. So what is a recursive function? Well, a recursive function is just a function that calls itself. So there's two parts to a recursive function. The first part is the base case. The base case is the method that causes the recursive case, or the recursive call, to end. And it's important to have a base case because if you don't, the recursive function will just call itself into infinity and will crash your program. The second part is the recursive case. The recursive case is the part of the function that is executed over and over again in order to make the problem you're trying to solve get smaller and smaller. In other words, trying to get your problem one step closer to reaching the base case, which will cause the function to actually end. So if the recursive case doesn't make the problem smaller, the function will continue to call itself and eventually crash. So let's look at the factorial example. This is probably one of the easiest ways to look at recursion and to understand it. So factorial is the product of an integer and all of the integers below it. So the factorial of 4 is equal to 24 because 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is 24. So here we have a recursive function. And we introduced this new syntax using if-else statements. And we'll talk about this in just a second. So we define our function factorial, and it takes in a number n. In this line, we check if n is equal to 0. If n is equal to 0, we're going to just return 1. Otherwise, or else, we're going to return n, the inputted number, times the factorial of n minus 1. So if we pass in factorial of 4, 4 gets called into this function. Since 4 isn't equal to 0, we're going to jump down to this else case. So in other words, we're just going to return 4 times the factorial of 4 minus 1, or the factorial of 3. So 3 gets passed in. So we go through this again. 3 isn't equal to 0. We're not going to return 1. We're going to jump down here. We're going to return 3 times factorial of 3 minus 1, or the factorial of 2. So pass in 2 again. 2 isn't equal to 0. Jump down to the recursive case. We'll do 2 times factorial of 2 minus 1, or the factorial of 1. Same thing, 1 isn't 0. Jump down here, n times 1 minus 1, factorial of 0. So we pass in 0. And finally, since n is 0, we're going to return 1, our base case. So then, each call to this function is called a stack frame. And what Python is going to do is it's going to go through each stack frame and return the value. So the factorial of 0 is 1. So it's going to jump up to this previous frame. 1 times 1 is 1. The factorial of 1 times 2, we know that this evaluated to 1, so we're going to plug that value in right here. So 2 times 1 is 2. And we're just going to keep jumping up. So 3 times 2, the product from down here, is 6. 4 times the factorial of 3, which we figured out was 6, we're just going to plug in up here. 4 times 6 is 24. So thus, the factorial of 4 is equal to 24. So recursion is a really tricky concept to wrap your head around. It took me a really long time to fully understand it. It's even trickier to implement and to write your own recursive functions. It takes time, but don't be discouraged if you can't really wrap your head around it at first. Just keep practicing it.